Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. This is Delicia speaking, and I have my friend Mary, Hara. We grew up together in New Jersey. We've known each other our whole lives. We had little baby pictures together, and we are going to chat today about a lot of things that are happening in the world, but it's specifically how it connects to our identity as US born, but our parents are from Paraguay, which is in South America. And we've just been chatting a lot about, well, we always really talk about these issues, but we're like, we need to bring this to a digital space. We need to talk about it more so our parents can listen, our relatives, and then the younger generation can feel represented in this community, because there are younger Paraguayan or Paraguayan-American young adults and children. So I want Mary to introduce herself, give us a little background of where she's from, what she does, and then we'll dive into the topics that we're going to talk about.
Hi, everyone. I'm Mary Hara, like Delicia said, and we did grow up together in the Paraguayan community. And a little background about myself. I'm really new to this, so I'm excited to be here. Delicia is the expert, so we got to talking one day, and she was posting about, Black Lives Matter, and she's always used her voice in her educational space. And so I reached out and I was like, let's talk about this. I feel like it's much needed, especially in our communities as Paraguayans living in America. And yeah, so I'm excited to start this dialogue with you, Delicia, and with everyone else as well in our community.
Yeah, I love, well, there's so many topics that we're going to talk about and continue the conversation, but today we really want to talk about three things. Number one, what it means to be Latina in the US, what it means to navigate two countries, not only physically and geographically, but in our homes, right? Our parents speak maybe Spanish or Guarani to us, and then in the outside world, we speak English in the work and school environment, and then talk about how does the Latino community support in solidarity with Black Lives Matter, because there's many layers to that. So those are kind of the three topics we're going to talk about. But first, Latina life. What is kind of the one thing that jumps out at you when we talk about our Latinidad or our Latina identity?
Well, like you said, I think, growing up in America as a Latina, as a Paraguaya, it has its challenges, because for me personally, growing up, when someone would ask, oh, where are you from? Which, that's a whole other topic of questions, but, when they first see you, they want to know where you're from. And my response is always Paraguaya, because that's how I grew up. But really, I'm American. I was born in America. So it's really interesting to, grow up with your Paraguayan culture, like you said, in the home. Your parents speaking Spanish, listening in on Guarani, eating food, Paraguayan food, and then transitioning into the American culture when going to school, even with friends. Mm-hmm. And I feel like we were lucky enough to also expand our Paraguayan community to mostly the church. OLPH, little Catholic church in Burnsville, New Jersey. And so I feel like we need to give them a shout out. Yeah. Because I feel like that's where our parents started. And so, that's where I feel like we met, and a bunch of other Paraguayans as well. And we formed a little community within our community outside of our homes. So I think that was also really important for me growing up, was to find that connection and community outside of my home place.
Yeah, I love that. The thing that I noticed when talking to people in the Paraguayan community is like, we are Paraguaya first, right? Mm-hmm. Before we identify maybe with Latina or American or whatever duality we exist in. But we're really proud of our Paraguayan identity and our heritage. Like you can see over here on the right, I have like a little pencil case that's Paraguay, right? And like the dictionaries behind me. So we hold that identity is so true and so fierce within us that I think it goes back to our parents introducing us to in the church, where all of our parents were kind of leaders and volunteers and created this community for us to grow, immerse in this culture so we can be proud of our roots and where we come from. And that really, I think, has transpired for us throughout our whole lives, where we're always representing Paraguay and always talking about the underrepresentation of it within other communities. When people talk about Hispanic Heritage Month, Paraguay is rarely mentioned. Or when we talk about Latin America or South America or Central America, and in those conversations, Paraguay is likely erased from the conversation. And that has a lot to do with this, I think, its geographical location and being in between really big Brazil and Argentina and Uruguay, and understanding that history is important, but a lot of people don't know. And because we grew up so connected to those roots, we know and understand that and want to feel represented. So I always say, like, oh yeah, soy Paraguaya, I am Paraguayan, and then I have to like backtrack and be like, well, I was born in the US and I lived in Paraguay for 4 to 5 years, and my parents are from there. So it's like we're both, but we're not both. I don't know. It's an interesting dynamic.
Yeah, I think you definitely nailed it. It's like, well, I was born in the U.S., but I'm Paraguay. My parents are from Paraguay. And I mean, you also have an interesting perspective because you lived there. I forgot that you actually lived there for a couple of years. So I'm interested to hear that experience. But something that you mentioned with, always being proud of saying that we're Paraguayans, I think that has to do a lot with, I don't know, my parents, your parents, my whole family. It's 100% Paraguayan. Yeah. Both parents Paraguayan. So I think that's rooted in, because our parents, well, I think for the majority of us, our parents are both Paraguayan. It's rooted in our blood, and we're just so proud of that and our other country. And especially another thing that I want to point out is, our parents put us in Paraguaya, and that was a huge, component in growing up too, and learning our heritage and our background as well, was Paraguaya. And I think we also danced that together. Yeah. And so, I think it's, like you said, we're really underrepresented, and this is our chance to kind of give Paraguay a platform and a voice, and we have to start somewhere. We want to make ourselves known because we are out there. There's not many of us, but we are out there, and it's honestly a beautiful and awesome country. Mm-hmm. And like you said, it's often overseen by the Brazils and the Argentinas and the Colombias, and because they have a bigger representation, not only geographically, but also the people, I think, in the United States. But that's my experience. That's what I've kind of run across. And I don't meet too many Paraguayans outside of Bernardsville, New Jersey. Well, Bernardsville, Bridgewater, Morristown,
like Bedminster,
Bedminster, yep, exactly. So, hopefully we can meet some new Paraguayans too along the way, and build our community and, give ourselves a voice. But
yeah, absolutely. I think living geographically in country in Paraguay, not just going like on vacation and stuff, when like maybe once a year, every 4 years, living there and going to school there and meeting friends, it's like I was too American to be Paraguayan, but then when we're here, we're maybe too Paraguayan or too brown to be American. And we live this constant duality of like, we're in one, but we're not enough. We're in another, we're not enough. And I think that really brings me to Borderlands, which is Gloria Anzaldúa's, getting a little nerdy academic here.
Go for it. I'm learning.
Because
if you
don't know me, I worked in higher education, and was a teacher and still a teacher online. So this is part of a lot of the research I did in undergrad and part of my master's program. So one of the books that I read was Gloria Anzaldúa, which talks about Borderlands and the new mestiza. So she talks about it through the lens of her Mexican identity and her Chicana identity, but it's still connected with me because she talks about Borderlands, which means we're constantly one foot in one culture, one foot in another, which creates kind of this third mestiza in a way, and like this third identity, because we hold both, but we also navigate the middle of it and like the borderlands and the intersections of it. So when I read her book, which I recommend every woman to read, or anyone who's actually in diversity and inclusion work to read, because she talks about a lot of like anti-racism stuff within her story of being Mexican American. So it really connected to me because I was like, wow, she gets it. She is writing into words what I'm feeling of navigating these two worlds. And we navigate it in school. Like I went to a predominantly white institution for undergrad, like Fairfield in Connecticut. And Amanda, which is Mary's cousin, we both went together. And
Shout out Amanda.
Shout out Amanda. Thank the Lord she went there too. Like I felt at home with her because she gets it. Like we just get our experiences because our parents are Paraguayan. We're first gen. We're the first in our community to go to college in the United States. And it's a different type of feeling of home when we like connect with Amanda and Mary and like my cousins, right, who also are navigating this experience in the US. And I just would recommend that book for anyone. And that's why I wanted to talk about it today, because I think anyone who's listening can really feel heard in that book.
Delicia, can you name the book again?
It's called it's by Gloria Anzaldúa, and it's called Borderlands, A New Mestiza.
Okay.
Yeah. And I can put it in like the comments.
Okay. Yeah, I'm definitely interested in reading that just by, your brief summary of it. It's definitely something that we do experience, and it almost feels like an identity crisis. I don't know if Gloria mentions that in her book about identity crisis, but shout out to Amanda again. We've had these discussions as well, and it is really something when, you want to fit in somewhere, and like you said, you're not Paraguayan enough when you go there, and you've lived there. So I'm really interested to hear that experience, actually living there for a couple years, and then, fitting in with the American cultures in our schools, especially in schools. I also went to a predominantly white institution, Quinnipiac, right down the road from you guys. And my high school, my town, I grew up in Basking Ridge, New Jersey. I was the only Latina Paraguaya in my school. So it is, you definitely are kind of in this purgatory middle ground with your experiences and where you fit in. And it's about, I guess, finding your identity, which how we found it, I don't know, like it's still a journey, I feel like.
Yeah.
And, obviously, like you said, we have our cousins, our families and everything like that. But to find that in America, in the United States, it's difficult to navigate that. Yeah,
for sure. And living in Paraguay was a lot of fun because I was with my close family, but it was interesting because I went to a private American school. So during the day it was English, it was taught in English and American curriculum, and we had Spanish class as well. But all the classmates were either like Paraguayans or kids who their parents worked in the embassy, or like international students like my brother and I. And they were just like so confused. They were like, you were born in the US, but your parents are from Paraguay and you're back in Paraguay. And they were just like, it was just like,
what? Yeah. What's going on here? Yeah. Usually all the Paraguayans stay in America.
Yeah. They're like, their mind was just like, what is happening? And they would literally just say, you're not Paraguayan, or be like, wait, you're American? They were just confused. And in turn, I was confused as 11-year-old, like,
Yeah.
okay.
You're like, what am I then? I'm so confused.
I was like, fine, I'm just Delicia then, whatever.
Yeah, I can't imagine that experience. But I'm sure it was also awesome. I would have loved to do that. But yeah, talking about the Borderlands, it's definitely that middle in between.
Yeah, and I think from living in Paraguay, I understood because we had Paraguayan History as one of the classes. So
yeah,
I really learned a lot about the history of where we come from and our identity. And I think that's really helped my journey to understand the history of our people, right? So Paraguay is colonized land, right? The people that were there before were the Guaraníes, the original peoples of Paraguay, and then it was colonized by Spain. So we are a mestizaje of both. We don't know up until where maybe we were indigenous or up until where we are Spanish. And we don't have that history because of colonization, right?
Right.
So understanding that history while living in Paraguay was really important. And then modern history of like the Triple Alliance War between Paraguay and Argentina and Brazil and Uruguay, and how Brazil has half of Paraguay basically.
Yeah.
Provincia Grande de las Indias, which is what it was called before. So all of that has helped me understand myself and where we live today in the US. And I think that's helped me connect to what's happening in terms of social uprising in the US and understanding, our parents are immigrants, so we have to understand US history, like where we immigrated, and so we can understand what's happening here and the history of slavery and this colonized land and the indigenous roots of this land is connected to our indigenous land in Paraguay. So
right.
I think all of that history has really helped me connect the dots. And like I said before, at heart, I'm an academic, so I just read history books and like textbooks for fun, just because that's what I do. But
right.
but I understand that like not everyone does that, and that's why I wanted to do like this recording and these conversations, so we can bring it down to simpler terms for people to have a conversation and still feel connected to that history and understanding without having to like major in it or read a textbook.
Yeah, no, it's funny because you're the educator, you love to do that. And, I read here and there, but honestly, like this has really brought to light the importance of reading and knowing the history of not only the US, which right now is super important, but also Paraguay. And where we come from. And that is super important. And like you said, yes, you don't have to know, all the facts. No one knows everything. Right. And that's why you can always start. You can always start informing yourself and just reading up on the history. I'm doing that more so now than I ever did.
Yeah.
And so like people can relate though with their personal experiences. And like you said, it's just about having a conversation and being relatable and being to understand it through experiences, and also having that educational background is important. So yeah, kudos to you for, having that in you and, kind of finding that, I don't know, not entertainment, but your nerdy side.
My nerdy side is coming out.
Yeah. Which is a great thing. I wish I was, more into that, but it's something that I'm definitely tapping into now.
Yeah. And I grew up with it in a way because my grandfather was a revolutionary during the dictatorship in Paraguay, right? So his history through his life, I was exposed to because he's my grandfather, right?
Right.
So we grew up hearing his stories and the narratives, and like what is not taught in the textbooks, he taught us, because we know that textbooks are whitewashed and are told by the winners of history, right? So
right.
even the history books that we read in Paraguay when I was living there, he was like, well, you also have to look at it from this perspective, and you have to understand this happened, and like his experience from starting the movement, Movimiento 14 de Mayo, and what they went through and what he went through with exile, and he was persecuted by the Stroessner dictatorship, and he was persecuted by the state, right? So we had to, growing up, know that history and knew from an early age that the history textbooks are not going to teach you everything. So you have to do your own research. So it was really instilled in me from a young age. And now as I'm older and as an educator, as a teacher, it's just continuing that process. But also, I don't know everything that's happened in the US. I have to read about like in college is when I learned about moral politics and the roots of the US and the different like political parties and how it was formed. And all those things are not taught like in high school. So we're all learning, like we're all still on this like educational journey, which I think brings us to understanding the Black Lives Matter movement. Is like we saw a huge awakening, I think, happen in light of George Floyd, which is good and also important to keep that momentum, right? We're how many weeks out of like Blackout Tuesday, and we're starting to see the normalized like feed, and here we are. We want to continue that conversation, and how does it connect to our lives, because their liberation is intricately connected to our liberation, right? So that's why I think understanding history and all of it is, and ourselves is important.
Right. Yeah, like you said, I mean, you grew up with it, and it's the journey of unlearning what you learned, right? You said, you know, our textbooks are whitewashed here, and it's interesting to get that perspective in Paraguay as well. Your grandfather told you stories, and he lived it, he experienced it. So it brings like a different level of history to just the textbook. And I think that's important right now, like you said, in what is going on with racial injustice and our Black community and the Latino community, and how we can support each other during this time. And a lot of it has to do with unlearning, learning to unlearn, learning to unlearn. And like you said, your grandfather went through liberation for Paraguay, and that is part of the reason why we are here in the United States.
Yeah.
And that's a whole different other topic, but our parents wanted better for us. They escaped the dictatorship, and essentially, you know, try to seek asylum, not in that manner, but that's what it was. And so again, it's really going back and understanding why our parents came here, you know, why your grandfather fought for justice in Paraguay, why we are fighting for that now in the United States, and why it's so important for our community, Latino, Latina, Latinx, Paraguayos, Paraguayas, especially, we have to speak up too now, and support the Black community and the Black Lives Matter movement. And as you said, it's an awakening that's recently happened in light of George Floyd, and also the pandemic has also kind of put a pause on distractions in your normal routine, I guess you would say, like going to work, you know, talking with your coworkers, then maybe going to the gym or going out, and not having the time to really sit there and read the news or watch the news as much as we are now. And that is why it is so important now, and why the momentum has to keep going. And it's kind of, there's no excuse now. You can't just sit back like maybe you used to and say, oh, I'm not into politics, or oh, like, I don't know what's going on. I don't read the news. I don't watch the news. I don't want negativity in my life, you know, and that's kind of where I've learned to find a balance. You have to find a balance of knowing what is going on, in your surrounding, in your communities, in your country, and educating yourself on that, and also, you know, doing something about it. And there's a lot of different ways to do it. There's not one right way. And yeah, and I think now it's the time to speak up and, you know, keep the momentum going, like you said. And we're all learning. I used to be that person, you know, I wasn't always in the news. Because, you know, a lot of times it is negative, but you have to know what's going on so that you can be part of that and know and then change and find that balance as well. Obviously for mental health.
Right.
Even for your mental health and everything like that, it's important to find that balance. But, you know, I feel like there's no more excuses now for, oh, what's going on? But anyways, yeah, so go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that it's balance, because we have to rest in order to recharge, to then continue this revolutionary cycle. And I think one important topic is like rest is part of the revolution. And I think that some people forget that piece. Even I do sometimes. Like when that whole thing happened with George Floyd, like I was doing panel discussions, I was teaching, I was showing up online, I was doing lives, and I was just trying to educate so people could feel like they're consuming information that they can digest, but also understand and learn. But then I had to take like a week to decompress and kind of retreat and recharge and read and rest and relax, so then I can feel recharged again to show up for the movement. Because we're not all going to be protesters. We're not all going to be teachers. We're not all going to be, what's another, like, defund the police activists in terms of showing up and calling every day. Like, we all have different roles to play. And I think it's important to figure out, what is my role? What sits well with me? What fits nicely with me and my life? And move from that space, right? Just because you see a protest happening doesn't mean that we all have to go there immediately, right? We have to discern, right? That's where discernment comes into place. And I think rest is part of that. Rest is part of the revolution, because if we're not rested, if we're burnt out, like, who are we going to help? We're not.
I know.
Like, if we can't even support ourselves, like, we can't give to other people. So, and burnout is also part of this capitalist patriarchal system that wants us to stay powerless.
Weak, powerless.
Yeah. That's a word. So
that makes sense.
So it's important to keep that in mind. And I think we can bring that to like our day-to-day life and work and school. And we need a moment to pause and rest. And if you're feeling like, I'm still part of this movement, I still want to show up, and you can, there's still many ways to do that. And it's knowing like the history, but also resting. And one thing that I think we forgot to talk about when we talked about history is like the Black community in Paraguay.
Yes, the AfroParaguayos.
Yeah, and the Afro-Latinos in our Hispanic communities, right? Slavery didn't just happen in the US, right? It happened all over South Central America, London, Europe. It was a global economic system. So we have to, and I think one thing that happens maybe in Latino communities is that we dissociate and say, oh, that doesn't happen to us, or like, this isn't happening in Paraguay or Argentina, like, we're all chill. And I was like, well,
I don't know about chill.
And like, we see the similar like fear tactics and discrimination against the indigenous peoples, like the Guaraníes, the Maca community, and lower income people. So this is happening in Paraguay as well. So it's connected to the US, and it's it's a transnational issue. So
yeah, like you said, going back to history, and even now actually, and I think a lot of what Paraguayans also don't know, I mean, I was talking to one of my family members, and they didn't even know that there was a Afro-Paraguayan community, and I believe it's Cambacua. I hope I'm saying that correctly. It's in Guarani, Cambacua, which means it translates to, I think it was Black People's Hollow. And so there is that community in Paraguay, and they are among the poorest, along with the Guaraníes, and they're not treated fairly as well. And it just goes to show that a lot of people don't know that that community does exist in Paraguay. It's about 2% of their population, but they're there. And I think that kind of ties into the Latinos, Latinas, Latinx in the U.S. And I've been kind of hearing that it's not our movement, it's not our fight, or what about us? We have a lot of issues that we are also fighting, but right now our Black community is hurting, and we have to be there to support them. We go through the same thing in terms of being able to relate to what they're going through. At the minimum, I mean, we will never fully understand what a Black person goes through, but I think one thing that's also important to recognize is there are Black people within the Latino community. And I feel like a lot of people also kind of take them out of the dialogue as well. And we're not only fighting for Black people who are, born in the US, or the Black people in our communities as well. And I think that is very important that people open their eyes and realize that as well. So the Latino community isn't just one race. And I think a lot of people kind of also misinterpret that and us and expect us to look a certain way. And like, oh, they don't look Paraguayan. Well, what does a Paraguayan look like to you?
Exactly.
Please tell me. So yeah, I think that's really important to kind of bring out there and make people aware of that too. And we're only stronger together. And we have the same oppressor. We go through the same thing. So I don't know. It's difficult to hear someone in our community not supporting Black Lives Matter right now.
Right. And I think something that grounds the conversation, if I'm talking to like my grandmother, right? If we're having this conversation in Spanish because she doesn't speak English, we have to use different vocab words in order to understand it. I think the biggest thing that helps her ground and understand is like, my family didn't really say this phrase, but I've heard it like on social media, and I've seen other people post it on Facebook, right? Like the phrase, hay que mejorar la raza, which translates to we have to better the race, which is essentially talking about colorism, right? The closer you are to whiteness, the better you are, or the straighter your hair is, the better you are, versus like curly Afro textured hair. So that's a big phrase in the Latino community, Spanish speaking household. And so that's deeply connected to colorism and racism. So if you're trying to find a way to ground the conversation with your family or or like community members in Spanish, it's like, okay, let's talk about this one phrase. Like, where does it come from? Why do we say it? Like, who cares about it? And I saw this phrase on someone's like Facebook post where I think her daughter married like a light-skinned, blue-eyed, like European features guy, and she was like, "Oh, this is great. Estamos mejorando la raza," or "We're bettering the race," basically saying we're bettering the Paraguayan race.
Yeah.
I was like, "What? We're already good. Like, we don't need to."
That is so problematic. Like you said, I've never heard, I know we had a brief discussion and you mentioned that. And honestly, like I haven't heard that phrase up until now in social media. My parents, I never heard them say that. I didn't grow up with that phrase, but it's interesting that it is out there. And what a shame that it's out there, because what does that even mean, And like you said, it ties into colorism, which is an issue, and I have seen that. But that phrase in itself, I have never heard of it. That's something new to me. But am I surprised? No. But yeah, so there's a lot of work to do
Yes.
within our community, and
yeah, I
yeah,
think starting this conversation or having these dialogues is like the first step. When I
right,
when I worked in higher education as a program coordinator in multicultural center, like 5 years ago, no one really wanted to have this conversation. Like Black people were getting shot then, and
right,
there wasn't this kind of like awakening to have these conversations. 5 years later, I see a difference in the space of people want to have the conversation, and they may not know like what the right way is, and it's like there is no right way, we just have to talk about it. And I think that's why our conversations are so important, and we want to root it in our Paraguayan identity, because it's specifically in our community, no one's really talking about it, and it exists everywhere because racism, white supremacy is everywhere. We all grew up in this like capitalist patriarchal system, and we all exist in it. So we have remnants of racism in ourselves because of how we just grew up and how we were indoctrinated. So I think having the dialogue is so important. That's why I'm so excited.
no, me too. Yeah, like you said, we have to talk about it, and now we are talking about it. You know, we're bringing it to light, and we're gonna have these conversations, and I'm really excited because what other time is there but now? And like you said, you know, 5 years ago, you're already seeing a difference, which is great. And so I'm really excited, and I'm really happy that we connected and we got to have this conversation and we got to get a kickstart on it. And
Yes.
I'm looking forward to more.
Yes. And for anyone who's watching, if you have questions or ideas or like have topics that you want us to talk about or feel like is important, please drop them in the comments below and we will chat about it. And keep in mind, we're bringing it from our lived experiences, like me as my lived experience as Delicia, Mary as Mary. So take what we say with a grain of salt and learn from it, and tell us what your experiences are and write them down and say, oh, this is something that I did or what I experienced. And we all want to have a dialogue. So make sure that you're connecting with us, and there'll be more.
Yes.
Thank you guys so much for joining us. We have a special announcement that we want to talk about and where these conversations are going to lead. Mary and I have been brewing up some ideas. So Mary, you want to tell people what it is?
Yeah, so we want to keep this conversation going. So we have a couple ideas, but we want to launch this as Ameriguayas. And this is going to be our space as American Paraguayas, talking about all the things. So we're really excited, and I hope that you guys enjoy what we're talking about, can relate to it. And like Delicia said, if you have any suggestions, let us know.
Yeah, drop them in the comments, chat with us, like us on Instagram, connect, love us.
Mucho, mucho, mucho amor.
Amor.